God is great, beer is good, and people are crazy. Remember the Billy Currington song? I mean, he does a lot better job than I. But I'm telling you, man, I thought people were fucking crazy. It just blows my mind how, I don't know, how insane people can, how susceptible we are to get wrapped up into things that don't really matter. I mean, it's intriguing in terms of a psychological experiment to look at people, how people react to falsehoods, to fake news, to lies, all over the map, you know? And especially this last year has been very enlightening to me, although I've been, you know, I can look back at a book I wrote in 1993, which at the time was called How to Have All the Money You'll Ever Need While Experiencing Life as One Continuous Orgasm, which that in itself is a piece of fake news I've been led to believe. But I mean, even in there, I realized when I read back at it, I realized that I was talking about how we've been screwed over. We've been lied to every step of the way by parents, schools, the whole works, as to what we are, right? And there's always people who are willing to take advantage of this. And the crescendo of it has probably been this year with, you know, with some people, mostly men and mostly white men, who've said, fuck it, we've had enough, we want our lives back, we've been tired of being stolen from, and this whole new right has begun. I call them the righteous right, really. And they, you know, they elected this opportunist, Donald Trump, who is probably trying to do his best, but he's not actually one of them, right? Donald Trump is a liberal Democrat, no question about it. He's always been, his whole family is, he's from New York, and although he is a hardworking entrepreneur, so that I can give him, but I just don't know how successful it'll be, but the amount of insanity that's going on in the wake of his election is mind-boggling. It's that people are crazy, part of it. That people buy, how they believe anything that comes out of this fake news media is beyond me. Especially when you have the example of how completely wrong these people were leading up. I'm no pundit. I'm no what am I going to call it? Pollster or expert on this sort of stuff. But people thought I was nuts months before. I mean, I'm talking 15 months before Donald Trump was elected. I was saying, you know, yeah, he's probably got a pretty good chance. I mean, because he's been so successful at everything he's ever done. I mean, and I'm not political. I'm not towing for him. I don't even vote. Okay, I actively encourage people not to stay away from the insanity. But nevertheless, just as an observer, as a sport observer, if you will. Oh, I read his book Art of the Deal back in the 80s, and even back then, the things that this guy was able to do are one in a billion people. I mean, this guy is amazing what he'd been able to pull off. So he pulls this off because it was his next thing, right? I mean, he'd be successful at everything he does, so he enters politics. And I remember looking at him thinking, well, there's probably a good chance he's going to win because he's won at everything else. So, and he just over the top wins at everything. He's more than by winning. But the insanity that's following this guy, because it's a threat, right? But start to understand the origin of words. I mean, words are chosen for a reason, going way back. And this right and left, right? Right-wing politics, left-wing politics. Or I should say this side is left, right? Anyway, and that's the right one. But if you look at the origin of the word, I remember one time I was riding in a car with my brother in Toronto. He'd just come back from Italy, and he had his GPS on, and it was going, and it was saying things in the Italians. So when it would say to turn left, it was sinistre. I think I might be mispronouncing it, but sinister, basically. That's how they say left, right? And, you know, the left. And if you look up the origin of left, it means things like weak, deceptive, sinister, these sort of things, right? When you look up the word right, it means things like righteous. So I'm gonna call that what's going on here, what's going on in the battle for ideas, in this madness, is a battle of the sinister left, which is to say the left, in its origin of its word, against the righteous right, which is to say right, in the origin of the word. But it's not that all of the people on the left are the sinisters and all of the people on the right are the righteous. There are what I'm going to call the pseudo leftists and the pseudo rightists, who are basically the useful idiots who are tagging along for some reason. So there's political opportunists. Everybody who's in politics for a long period of time becomes this corrupted non-self. That's what I've experienced. That's what I've seen, because they have to make compromises against their own conscience if they're going to stay there for any length of time. So what they do, what the right, you might call this the sinister part of the right, what they do is they try to deceive the righteous right into supporting them to gain all kinds of money so they can go fight their boogeymen. So they set up and they attract, of course, the pseudo-right, because that's what the rhinos are. If you look at the United States, we're talking about that now. The rhinos are basically the pseudo-right. They're not really right. They're just whatever the means. If it justify, if the end is justified, then it doesn't matter what the means. If we got to go bomb a whole raft of people because it satisfies the beer drinkers at home, then that's what they're going to do. And especially if it satisfies the military-industrial complex, which is supposedly the pseudo-right as well. But that's not who put Trump in. Not the instigators, anyways. This was the righteous right, principally men, principally white men, who have had enough of being fucked over for years and robbed and robbed and robbed from. Now, not all of them are, of course, righteous, and nobody is completely righteous, but it's a scale, right? If you are standing up for your own production, that's not about being greedy. The left, the sinister left, has turned it completely around and says, if you don't want to be taxed, you're greedy. But it's okay that the seething horde who wants to steal your good, they're not greedy. But originally what greed meant was to envy what other people have, right? So the sinister left has set up this idea through propaganda that all those on all kinds of programs, they have a right to it. They have a right to steal from other people, right? And of course, the sinister left, what they're doing is they are trying to solicit support from the dependent classes, right, to gang up on the productive classes. So what you see going on here is nothing to do with whether Comey did this or those the Russians. It's all just made up shit. All made up shit. It's all fake news, okay? If we know that, and all we got to do is look back at how wrong these people were through the election. Whether they were wrong completely knowingly or they were just making it up, who knows? But what they were putting forth was completely falsehoods. It was complete fake news. Right up till midnight of the election, they were still calling it for Hillary. And meanwhile, people like myself, I was reading other polls that Trump was probably ahead. I mean, I was just walking around like, yeah, Trump's probably going to win. And people would look at me like I was completely lost my mind. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Look at what's on the news. The polls are this and polls are that. Well, it's fake news, though. And it always has been. I noticed it years and years ago. Years and years ago, the CBC came out to our place where our farm was. Back when I was a kid, my parents ran a cheese plant. And I remember reading the article later. I did know how to read a little bit. It wasn't great, but and I was just noticing, why do they have all this wrong? They had the number of kids in the family wrong. What we did was wrong. Like the details, every detail in there was wrong. It seemed like, and I remember thinking, what? And these people call themselves reporters. Like, why don't they at least, give a call to verify how many? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It seems like they got away from it. They got I guess they get they just hire the cheapies out of the university or something like that, right? But that's what's. I just wanted to talk about this, about how, facts don't really matter. And in a way, it makes sense, right? Because we've evolved as creatures where facts didn't matter. It was more our emotions of our crowd. So if we're stuck over in a crowd, that is, we believe somehow that what the sinister left is telling us about global warming and carbon, that CO2 is bad for us, even though that CO2 is, you know, scientifically and probably biologically the most important compound on Earth. If it wasn't for CO2, you know, the plants would starve and so on, and that we're actually at almost starvation levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. And there's no direct correlation between that and warming and so on. There's all these things that are not answered, but yet they're just told over and over and over again. And of course, the sinister left has always got to get a hold of children, right? Because they cannot put forth their ideas to adults or to educated children even, you know. So it's about getting the kids early, getting the women propagandized, because you get the women, you get the children, you get the men. I mean, it was the Nazis used to know that quite well. You get the women, you get the children, you get the men. But what's happening now is it always starts from the top back down again. The men reassert their sovereignty, as the only people who've ever really been sovereign are men, and there's biological reasons for that, because they were the ones who had to do the fighting, right? They had to assert their control over, protection over their tribe. So the sovereigns, the men, are starting to push back, and Trump, being the opportunist, has jumped in there and promised the righteous right that he would deliver, but he's not able to deliver very well because the sinister left is so incredibly strong. So there's this battle going on, right? Because the righteous right want to be able to, they understand that their property is a result of themselves, an extension to themselves, right? It's not much different than their fingers or whatever it is. It's if their fingers produce something, then that belongs to the fingers, right? Because it came to be because of that. And it doesn't, anybody else to take it is stealing. They understand that. But the dependent classes have been propagandized from the time they're very young. And anybody who's intelligent in the schools, the higher IQ ones, have to be drugged down, just like they had to do in Soviet Russia and so on, giving horse tranquilizers to people who would question. It's the same thing that's going on in schools now. The sinister left is they are chemicalizing who? The boys, right? And just so happens being turned out now that the ones who are on these medications have higher IQ. So it seems to be systematic. The sinister left is extremely sinister. But the reason they can be so sinister is because people are crazy. You know, and that's my only way of being able to describe it. But they're not crazy in terms of functionality-wise, because after all, we as creatures, we want to get what we can in the course of a day, right? So civilized people or mature people who mature realize that it's actually beneficial for us to negotiate. But those who are not mature, and many adults who've been stuck through the leftist program, the sinister program, are so chemicalized and so propagandized and so threatened and so fractured as human beings. I mean, why else have a single family home but to fracture the children? If you fracture the children, you fracture society. It's easier to control it because you can pull on one part and then pull on the other part. But if we're all together, we're solid, right? But if our pieces are all over the place and we're emotional windbags, the sinister left can pull us wherever we want. And that's what's really happening. So when resources are available, either you can get them in the free market or you can get them from government handouts, then and if you got no thinking ability and you're crazy, which so many people are demonstrating themselves to be, then they're just going to go for the easy pickings, which is what's happening, and the left is quite comfortable to feed off of that, because it's all about, in a democracy, it's the worst form of tyranny, because the stupidest people get to govern, right? Or at least in the monarchy, you had fairly intelligent people who would run, and they would also think long term, because you don't want to pass on your fiefdom to your family. It's like you want to make sure you run the farm well, so you can pass it on to your kids. You want to make sure that the kingdom is well kept, so you can pass it on. But in democracies, it's just short-term thinking of just 4 years or whatever, so you can just run it like Obama did. You know, you can run $10 trillion deficit, never have a budget, and be given a peace prize, and the sinister left will call you a hero. Meanwhile, when somebody comes in who wants to actually clean things up, it's all Marussia, Marussia, Marussia. It's just all nonsense, people. This video is not about politics or anything else. It's an exercise to realize that we ourselves, within ourselves, are fucking crazy if we believe any of this stuff. And it's just about waking up and asking the questions. Just because somebody is saying something, why are they saying it? Why are they saying it? Ask the questions. Why are they saying it? So, hope this is helpful. Steve here again. Great talking. God is great. Beer is good. People are crazy.